Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Make Things Better podcast. Today I have Amanda Cookson on the show. I'm really excited to talk to you, Amanda, and we're going to crack on and talk about the imposter syndrome. Before we get into that, if you don't mind me asking, how did you kind of get into coaching, which you're doing now, right? And do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and what you've been up to over the last few years, maybe?
Oh, golly. So I worked for a company called Learn Direct for many years in kind of e-learning, digital customer service. And when the department I ran and the work sort of came to an end, I wanted to be one of those people who did something amazing with that opportunity, with that change. And I'd always wanted to run my own business, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was feeling a bit down as well because it didn't end well. So I started working with a coach, and this coach asked me lots of questions about what did you like most about your role? And I fancied a change. And I was talking about how the thing I liked most about work was those one-to-one conversations, you know, when you're kind of talking to your direct reports or you're mentoring and supporting people, and how much I got from that. And in thinking about that and thinking about the coach I was working with, it kind of really struck me that I quite fancied training to become a coach. So I then spoke to some people who were already coaches to understand where they learned, what they did. And there are loads of different coaches and loads of different kinds of training you can do. And I ended up going to, I think, one of the best kind of coaching schools in the country, because the person I spoke to really inspired me, and she kind of asked me questions that just got my brain thinking in a completely different spot. And I've never looked back since. So I've been running my own business. I've been coaching people now professionally for about 6 years. And every day is joy. I just love what I do. It's like I've never had to work a single day since I decided to make this move. I'm really into imposter syndrome because it was something I really struggled with. And so I've been really lucky to interview some kind of world leading experts in it and to work with some fabulous people who kind of struggle with it themselves. And so I feel like I've really changed my own narrative and story, and I'm looking forward to kind of sharing that with you. And I'm really into it at the moment. It's going to sound a little bit weird, but a confession. Okay, so if there is a party or a lunch event or we're down the pub, I've always felt like there are people who you look at and you think, oh my God, I want to sit with them. I want to talk to them. I want to be with them. And I've never felt like I'm one of those people. I always feel like I'm the person that they're, oh God, no, not Cookson. So I've been working on understanding more about your energy. And there's a lovely phrase I've got like on one of my kind of books that I make notes in, that your energy introduces you before you open your mouth. And so I'm kind of been looking at behavior and thinking and how that influences the way that you are, the way that you be, and how people feel about you. So I've been learning loads and having a blast.
Wow, that's so interesting. And it's great to hear. I mean, you're already bringing such great positive energy to the show as well. And I guess it's cool as well to hear that you're kind of coaching, the coaching direction came out of something that at first may have seemed like an obstacle or a negative thing. But you've actually managed to switch that on its head and ended up doing something that I'm guessing you're more happy with now, which is amazing. So before we kind of delve into the imposter syndrome too much, I think just for anyone out there who's not aware of this, do you want to just tell us firstly, what is the imposter syndrome? Because I know only a few months ago, I had no idea what it was. And then I spoke to Alan in a podcast, and I think Alan, our designer at Hive, actually brought the term up first to me. And that's when I was first introduced to it. So yeah, what is the imposter syndrome?
So first of all, the imposter syndrome is not a syndrome. So it's a collection of thoughts and feelings. It's not a syndrome. So it's not a medical condition. It's not like a mental health illness. It's not a disease. It's not something you've got. It's a way of thinking and being. And there are loads and loads of myths around imposter syndrome, which I think is super, super unhelpful. It was first discovered in 1978. So there were these two researchers, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Innes, and they were looking at PhD students, and they were looking mostly at women. And there were these incredible, intelligent, talented, fantastic women in front of them who were all talking about not being good enough, struggling, thinking that they couldn't kind of see their PhD through and that they weren't enough. And so they coined the phrase imposter syndrome. And I think one of the myths is that it's women. This is a women's thing. It's not a women's thing. You can be any gender at all. The research actually shows, and this is getting a little bit more technical, but there are kind of feminine traits. So they're, regardless of kind of gender and whether you identify as a man or a woman, if you have feminine thinking traits, then you are more likely to have imposter feelings than if you have those more kind of masculine ones, if that makes sense. And the other thing with imposter feelings, I'm going to call them, is that it impacts on high achievers. So the reason why it impacts on high achievers is because if you are somebody who's a high achiever, you are going to be doing different things, pushing you out your comfort zone, doing more and more, and you're going to end up in situations where you've not done something before, you've not experienced something before, and you will be facing that thing that we all have as human beings of, can I do this? Now, where imposter feelings are different to kind of self-doubt is that for self-doubt, you might think, oh my gosh, I've not done this before. Am I going to be okay? Am I going to be able to do this? I'm going to do my best, but how is it going to go? With imposter feelings, you tend to have this false belief about yourself, contrary to evidence, contrary to what's behind you and what you've done before, that you cannot do things, that you're not capable. And so in that feeling of being an imposter is this sense of not being enough, not being capable, not being able, and not learning from past experience. I could go on about this at great length, but I'm going to pause for breath so you can ask me a question.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I guess a lot of it is to do with maybe the kind of primitive side of the brain. Is that right?
Yes. So we've got in our brain two almond-shaped clusters of neurons called your amygdala, and their job is to kind of look out and scan for danger. And they do this 5 times every second. So am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And they're looking for problems. So, we had a chat beforehand just to kind of get really chill and get to know each other. But if we hadn't been doing that, maybe we'd both be thinking, oh my God, am I safe? Am I safe? What does Amanda think of me? What does Tom think of me? And we'd be having all these things kind of going on and interfering with our thinking. And when your amygdala is activated, you have a neurochemical that floods through your brain called cortisol. And what it does is it shuts off access to that bit of your brain where you can think creatively, positively, and to find that kind of forward motion and ways of doing things. So you end up in this kind of stress state with your primitive reptile brain kind of finding all the dangers and all the problems, and you're pretty stuck.
Yeah, it can be a dangerous place to be in. I know from trading as well that once that amygdala is activated, you can start making really dangerous decisions. So, for example, when shares drop, I know that sometimes that's when the amygdala can be activated because of all that fear. And that's when people can maybe just rush into selling shares when that may not be a rational thing to do, but it's because it's that primitive, irrational sort of part of the brain, right? So also just kind of going back to imposter feelings rather than imposter syndrome, do you think it would actually help if this was called imposter feelings more than it being called imposter syndrome? And the other question that I have kind of relating to all of that, and I know I'm going completely off the questions that I initially planned out to ask you, but sorry about that. So I've not really, you may not have planned for these questions, but I'm sure you have the answers. So one thing that I've been learning about recently is identity, and how when you identify as something or someone, and maybe with like addiction or with an illness, that can actually be quite a detriment to your progress in trying to overachieve, kind of overcome that problem. So I heard recently, I think with maybe alcoholics, if you identify as an alcoholic, then it can be harder to actually overcome that. Now, with the imposter syndrome, that's almost like you're having an identity, and it's like you have the imposter syndrome, and that's something that you feel like you may need to try and move away from. But if we always just called it imposter feelings, then maybe that'd just be something that kind of comes and goes, and it's something that you can feel like you can just work on over time and slowly move away from. I don't know if you have any sort of thoughts on that, and whether it should be called imposter feelings rather than imposter syndrome.
I think you are spot on with your thinking there. So one of the kind of world leading experts in imposter, she calls it the imposter phenomenon. So she calls it IP. Whereas I kind of like imposter feelings. I think the important thing is exactly as you've mentioned. You know, if you say, I have imposter syndrome, you're saying, I am an imposter. This is part of me and who I am. If you can move yourself into a space of thinking, I'm noticing imposter feelings, then they are not you, and they are something that you can then look at and address. And one of the key things for tackling imposter feelings is to change the way you think about yourself, change your narrative. So I talked earlier about how, you know, it's this false belief, contrary to evidence, that you're not enough, that you can't do this, that you're going to be found out. And so if you can start to change the way you think about yourself, notice your thinking and change your thinking, then this is going to have a huge transformation effect on kind of how you are. And I think with someone who's really struggled with imposter feelings for most of my career, I mean, I'll give you some lovely examples of my fabulous imposter feelings. So when I first learned as a coach about, it was then called the imposter syndrome, I listened and I wrote lots of notes, and I decided that my feelings I had weren't impostery enough to be imposter syndrome. So I was imposter about imposter syndrome. And actually there's a test you can do. It's a kind of a Clance index where you can answer questions to measure your kind of imposter feelings and kind of where you are on a spectrum, because you can have imposter feelings about one area, not another area, and to different degrees. So in this particular scale, I'm kind of in the top quarter, but in my head, no, I'm not. This isn't enough to be imposter feelings. And usually when I work with clients and they start to get, oh, hang on a minute, this collection of thoughts or imposter thoughts, they're pretty common, and this is what's going on about it. It's kind of often a relief to have things named. And then it's work to start to kind of shift the way you think. And it isn't something, you know, there isn't a magic wand. It's about kind of constantly looking at your thinking and being vigilant and changing the way you think about yourself. But you were talking earlier about when people are stressed or triggered, they do these stupid things. And I think it's worthwhile thinking about, what is that stress response for? So going back to when we could be eaten and our life depended on the way that we thought and behaved. When we are stressed and triggered, it's because we are seen as being in danger. So we're in danger, it's life or death according to our brain. So our focus completely narrows. So what happens is you have these perceptual difficulties where you don't actually see what's right in front of your face. So if you are struggling with imposter feelings and you're being activated in this way, you will not see the evidence of what you do well. You will only see what you're doing badly, because it kind of shrinks that. And also the part of your brain that works in this forward thinking, this is what I'm going to do space, gets shut off. So you're then in this kind of problem space. And the way that our behavior works is, if you think about it, our thinking flows like water. So it's like rivers that have cut through the landscape and are kind of flowing down towards the sea. And the more you think something, the stronger that river and that pathway is. So what you need to do to change from having these imposter thoughts to having these positive, helpful thoughts is you need to stop the water from going in the negative way and start to change the thinking going in another way. You have to keep practicing and practicing that thinking until that pathway is stronger than the old negative pathway.
Yeah, that sounds quite, well, that's a great tip, but I imagine at first that could be quite challenging to kind of change your thinking on it. And how much does like awareness and mindfulness come in? And do you think it is hard to overcome these imposter feelings, or is it something that people can overcome with a few techniques?
I think it's an interesting question, because is it hard to overcome? Well, yeah. Is it doable? Is it worth it? Is it something that people can do? Yeah, absolutely. If you think about anything good in life, it takes effort. So the way, and you kind of mentioned mindfulness, and one of the key pieces of thinking that can make a difference in imposter feelings is this mindful self-compassion. So it's something that has had a profound effect on me and has really shifted the way that I coach and work with clients. So when you have an imposter thought, so you might say to yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not capable, everyone else is cleverer, brighter, smarter, or whatever it is than me. You notice that you've had that thought, and rather than beat yourself up and say, oh my God, I can't believe I'm thinking this, this is terrible or whatever, you just think, right, well done me. That was an act of mindfulness. I noticed my thinking. And then following this self-compassion process, the next thing you do is you think, well, that's just being a human. We all have these thoughts. We all struggle with our identity, our capability. We all struggle sometimes to see our worth and to value ourselves. And that's just common humanity. And then the next thing you do, and this is the beautiful piece, is you start to behave with yourself like you would do with a friend who was struggling with imposter feelings. So for me, when I want to soothe myself, I kind of put my hand here on my chest. Other people, I know they like to kind of rub their tummy. Some people like to kind of put their hand on their head, but you just give yourself a little bit of kind of a gentle, loving touch. And you can do this in meetings because no one would know what you were doing. And you just talk to yourself really kindly and you say, do you know what? We're working on ourselves. And we're going to have these moments where we don't feel okay, or we're struggling with how well we're doing and how we see ourselves. And that's all right, because I know you're doing your best. And every day is an opportunity to learn, and you are good enough.
Oh, I really love that.
Just by doing that every time, it completely shifts the way you feel about you, and it gets rid of those imposter feelings. But it's, think about the water, you're kind of honing a path. So to kind of help anyone who's listening and thinking, I couldn't do that. When I really got to understand my imposter voice and the feelings, it was so loud, and I would be constantly telling myself that I was shit. You're shit. This little voice in my head, you're shit. And it was so common and so kind of pervasive that I didn't even notice it was there. It was just always there. It was just always a part of me. You're shit, you're shit, you're shit. And I started off by telling it to F off. So then if you can imagine, we had this negative voice, me shouting at myself and trying desperately to move my thinking and get myself into a positive space. And it wasn't really working. I was noticing my feelings, but I still wasn't feeling great about myself. And moving then into that space of that loving self-compassion and giving myself love. So rather than telling this feeling of being rubbish, of not being enough to go away, it's not going to go away. If you ignore it, it's not going to go away. So it's about then listening, being kind to yourself and changing the way you speak to yourself. And it's just been huge. I feel like a completely different person, and what I'm capable of doing has shifted massively. And I do the same with the clients I work with. And it's like a weight has been lifted, but it is work, and it is being mindful, and it is sending love to yourself.
It's so heartwarming to hear that you've kind of overcome this, and now you're like really seem like enthusiastic about helping other people who are dealing with this as well, because you can appreciate what it's like to be in that zone. The other thing that I think is quite interesting about how, you know, at one point you're saying like F off, but if you actually think about what you're doing there with that like subconscious habit, is you're actually like swearing at yourself, or like you're being mean to yourself, you're fighting yourself. If you're you know, approaching yourself from a place of hate, then even though you're trying to fight something that you don't like about yourself, it's still coming from a place of hate. And that's why it probably doesn't work so well. Whereas that compassion, that self-love, that trying to be kind to yourself, that is so effective, because you're actually starting to love yourself, and you know, you're building up those blocks that over time can hopefully become something even bigger and more effective as well. So yeah, I think one of my questions was, how can people combat the imposter syndrome? But to be honest, I feel like we've probably covered that one already.
There are more things which I would like to kind of share. So one of them is this changing your self-talk, and this self-compassion exercise is just so important. The next one, which is really fundamental as well, is to gather your evidence. So somebody who is struggling with imposter feelings struggles to see their value, struggles to see their worth. So when I first started coaching, you know, am I good enough? Does anyone like what I do? I wouldn't ask for feedback because I was so scared that the feedback was going to be negative. And so coaches have like an ultra uber Jedi coach who supports you in your work, who's your supervisor, and you go to supervision. So my coaching supervisor said to me, Amanda, how do you know whether you're a good coach or whether you're not a good coach if you're not asking this and not gathering feedback? So I kind of started to ask the question, and I was very afraid of what people were going to say. And people said the most amazing things. And it shocked me. It really shocked me. And I was kind of honest, because I work with people who struggle with imposter feelings, that, you know, I didn't want to ask. And they were really shocked. And it turned out to be, you know, a really great conversation. But if you are listening to this and you are resonating and thinking, yeah, I do struggle to see that what I do is enough. I do think other people are better than me. I do sit in meetings and I have something really valuable to say, but I don't open my mouth. I do project work, and I look just for the one mistake, and I don't hear what people are saying is great and of value. I'm not putting myself forward for promotions and opportunities because I think other people will be better than me. Then start to collect feedback. Start to collect all of that evidence about what you do and what you do well, because that will make it much harder for that little imposter voice in your head to tell you you're rubbish, because you can then look at all of this evidence. And the other thing that's really important is, if you are listening to this and you're thinking, well, I don't have any imposter issues, but so-and-so does, then your gift to them is to give really specific feedback. Because quite often, and like when I was little, my mum would say, oh, Amanda, darling, you're wonderful, you're lovely, you're amazing, you're just so amazing. And actually, that's useless. It's so vague. And it just sounds like a load of old fluff. So when you tell someone, oh, this is brilliant, what's brilliant? What specifically makes it brilliant to you? Because if you can be granular and very specific, so the way that you described X, or this particular aspect of your code, or whatever it is, then people can really hear and understand what they do well. So that's it. Feedback is really important. So when I'm working with clients who are really struggling with their imposter feelings, I suggest start to collect, you know, make a spreadsheet, collect all of that feedback. And when you are having a bad day, when the voice that you are not good enough is so loud, and kind of trying to work with yourself with love isn't working, look at your list, look at what everyone else is saying, and that will really help to lift it. And the other thing that's really important is that when you are struggling with imposter feelings, any problems, any issues, like with retrospectives, delving into this could have been better, that could have been better, really comfortable space. What did you do well? What can we celebrate? What are the successes? Well, it was just luck, or other people did it. When you hear that kind of brushing it off. So quite often people say that, kind of people with imposter feelings, it's like kind of Teflon for positives, and everything just slides off because we're not going to listen to that. Whereas it's Velcro for all the negatives. So again, if you are struggling with imposter feelings, celebrate your successes. I've got to, which is just embarrassing. But, if I do something that's gone well, I will celebrate and I'll go, yes, because I really want me to notice I did that and I did it really well. Yes. And then for clients, when they're trying to it was nothing, it was just a tiny thing, I'll make sure that's really celebrated so people can feel and get a sense of their successes and the things they do well. So it will help them recognize they can do it, relish that positive feeling. And again, you think about this river flowing, you are further strengthening that image, that identity, that you are good enough, that you can do it, that you are capable.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what I was thinking about when you were talking about getting that external feedback is actually what's going on there is you've got the primitive brain and one individual's primitive brain coming up against reality. It's literally coming up against what's actually going on in reality, from a rational point of view, probably a rational point of view from a wide range of people who are actually celebrating your success in whatever it may be. And it's if you actually think about that, it's one is just so much more powerful than the other, or at least it should be, but it's not, because the primitive brain, how that works is so powerful as well. But it's you'd like to think that the more external feedback you receive, the kind of smaller that those imposter feelings would become. So I can definitely see how that would work. And then, as you say as well, celebrating your own successes, and the more you do that, then hopefully that can become a subconscious habit where you can actually start to recognize that you're doing well. So how can people question their own thoughts a bit more and maybe actually become aware? So that's kind of the first step of all of this, but how do you get to that place where you actually are aware of, I'm having this imposter thought or feeling?
So a great way to boost awareness is to just write your thoughts. So I'm a big fan of going lo-fi, pen and paper, and I do something called free writing. So every morning I write a couple of sides of just whatever I'm thinking. And sometimes I might be thinking about, how great everything is and how excited I am about various projects. And sometimes I'm thinking about something, an opportunity I missed or something I could have done better. And I've just used that to really get a sense of, what am I thinking? So for me, when I started working on myself, it was around this imposter feelings, as we're talking about not being enough. And actually, as I've started to do more and more writing and more self-discovery and understanding, underneath my not being enough is actually that sense of love and not loving me, not liking me. And I can go and think about, we could talk for hours about what happened in my childhood and and you don't need to know it. And you don't necessarily need to pick all the open wounds that you've got. But once you start to understand what's going on for you, you can then start to change your thinking. So if you're saying, I'm not likable, well, how am I likable? Who does like me? Where's that evidence? And start to do that work. And having a coach, and you can coach, in groups, online, you can do all sorts of things, gives you some accountability because you meet someone regularly. You can also have a close friend that you work with, but it's just about being disciplined, so that when you have thoughts that are really not helpful and constructive, you take action, but also being kind, because actually we all struggle. We all struggle with love and connection, and we all want to be seen and recognized and accepted. It's just part of being human. And some of us have got more of a struggle than others. And it's just about taking action so we can be the best version of ourselves and make the most of, I guess, the opportunities that are in front of us. Because your relationships with your partners, your friends, your work colleagues, everything shifts when your relationship with yourself shifts.
Yeah, start with yourself. That's what I think another podcast guest actually said on here before to me, which I kind of agree with too. And just to kind of wrap things up, so what I find amazing is that you were in a situation with a job where things maybe didn't work out and you had to leave, right? And you actually turned that into such like a positive. So that went from a negative to a positive. And then the same sort of things actually happened really with your imposter feelings in the past, in a way anyway, because I guess you would have learned and grown and become so much more aware and delved into the imposter syndrome so much, gone on to speak to experts on this as well, other like international speakers and whoever else, learned so much, and then being able to actually come on like this podcast, write plenty of blogs. I'm sure you've been on other podcasts and spoke to so many people, helped so many people with like having these imposter feelings. And that all kind of came out of struggle in the first place, right? So you've managed to turn that negative into a positive. And so I think that's a nice thing to kind of end this podcast on, is how, yeah, people may be struggling with this right now, but there is a opportunity to actually turn this into a positive thing by becoming more self-aware, more aware of your thoughts, by journaling and developing healthier habits, which can result in people becoming even more confident than they ever possibly could have been if they weren't aware of this in a way. So I think that's really amazing. My final question for you though, Amanda, is what can people do to make things better?
What can people do to make things better? So for me, think about your life, your experiences, your relationship, how you're getting on at work, the feedback you get from work, everything as just data. It's just feedback. So your circumstance doesn't create more circumstance. So if you are not doing very well at managing people at the moment, you've got really difficult feedback around the way that you communicate with others, whatever it is, that doesn't mean that you're stuck. It's just data. So what you need to do to make things better is, if you are doing stuff and you're getting good results, good feedback and stuff you like, do more of that. And if you're doing stuff where you're not happy, it's not giving you what you want, do less of that. And there are people, books, skills, therapists, coaches, mentors, friends, all sorts of things and support that you can put around you to help you do more of what you want, and do less of what you don't want. It sounds like the most simplest, stupidest thing to say, but it's so true. Just treat everything, the shittiest day in the world, feedback, the greatest day in the world, feedback.
That's really great advice. And I think, detaching from things and maybe not labeling them as good or bad, but using them as data and analyzing that to learn from it to make the next day better. I think, that's amazing advice, really. So thanks for that. Where can people find you, Amanda, if they want to hear more?
I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, so I can share my kind of links, and I'm going to make a little pack as well, so people can download a free pack that's got more information about imposter syndrome. It's got some information about the brain, and it's got the notes from the speaker who was talking about, this international expert on imposter syndrome, and what she said, as well as a link to a couple of my blogs.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much for coming on. And I really do hope people can learn something from this episode and that it is helpful. Thank you to everyone listening as well. Hope you have enjoyed the podcast. And if you are watching this on YouTube, please do like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me and to everyone at Hive IT who are trying to make good things happen. So I appreciate you and have a great, wonderful rest of your day.